What's that sound? It's For Amusement Only, the EM and Bingo Pinball Podcast. Welcome back to For Amusement Only. This is Nick Baldridge. It's a sleepy edition of For Amusement Only. Been a busy couple weeks, so let's get into it. I've been doing a repair around town again, starting off slow and just kind of getting people fixed up and then moving on to the next person in line. And one of the first people that I helped had an early Williams solid state with the special drop target mechs that I love very much. And I think I mentioned in a much earlier episode how much I disliked these drop target mechs, and I was reminded exactly why I disliked them, having not messed with one for a little while. The basic construction of the drop target mech is pretty simple, that Williams did. There's a few things which I might change. The thickness of the plastic is not very, so it feels, kind of cheap, but that's just above the playfield. Below the playfield, what's happening is that there is a small circuit board, and as the target drops, there are two contacts which are shaped in kind of a horseshoe shape that ride along down the circuit board. And as they ride through different traces on the circuit board, it will tell the machine that the target is reset, dropping, or dropped. And the problem with this design, there's a few of them. First of all, metal on metal. And in this particular machine, they drop an awful lot. So your basic goal is to bash as many of these targets as possible, and there are quite a few drop targets in this particular machine. So each of the circuit boards needed attention, and the contacts themselves. Now the contacts are similar to the contacts that are on spiders for EM step units. Those are okay. They can get gunky and dirty, and of course they're solid state, so you have to be careful about burnishing them, because you'll remove the plating and then all of a sudden they won't work at all. That is to say, if they worked before you took the thing apart. So, cleaning requires alcohol, patience, and if you're lucky enough to have one of these, a fiberglass eraser pen. This thing shoots out little hairs of fiberglass, and you can use those to clean the traces very quickly, as well as the horseshoe contacts on the back of the drop target. So, the biggest problem with this assembly is not that particular construction. The construction of the circuit board and all that, that's fine. The problem is the really cheap plastic into which the circuit board screws. So the circuit board is out. Let me see how I can describe this. You have the front of the drop target, and that's what the ball hits. The back of the drop target has that horseshoe contact assembly, and that's screwed to the plastic of the target. Then you have the circuit board, which is behind that. That circuit board assembly screws to a piece of plastic, like a mounting plate, that is in turn screwed to a metal plate. Well, as you might imagine, if you have the force of a steel ball smacking in to these drop targets over and over again, and on this particular game there's a bank that's very close to the flippers, I would say. The problem is that just through normal wear and tear of the ball hitting this target over and over again, it's going to break that plastic mounting bracket. And that's precisely what happened in this game. So your choice is really not very good. The situation, rather, is not very good when you find yourself there. So in this case, one side of the target circuit board, and it's only screwed in with 2 screws, one side had come up, and I said, "No, that's not looking good." Started unscrewing the other side, and the tiny bit of plastic that was holding it into place crumbled into dust. And so the unfortunate thing is that there's no way to attach the circuit board anymore, basically rendering that portion of the game completely dead, because there's no way for the game to sense if that drop target is up, down, or in the process of dropping. So I didn't have any spare brackets on me, and in fact, I don't think those brackets are made, the plastic backing brackets. If they are, wonderful. I'm sure you could 3D print something that would do as reliable a job as those Williams brackets, but really, it's a poor design. When you have metal into plastic like that, and especially in something that is just going to shake itself apart, it's, in my opinion, a poor design. So, just remember, those drop target assemblies are awful. Drop targets are super fun. They're one of my favorite features. I really do enjoy them quite a bit. And in my personal opinion, godly drop targets are the best. They mechanically. You rarely have a problem like that where it's not just a simple switch adjustment. You don't have the circuit board design. And even Williams, in my opinion, never really got the drop target correct after they moved out of the EM era. And their EM drop targets are such a stark contrast to this. That assembly in an EM Williams is so ridiculously rugged. It's kind of surprising that they went so cheap on these solid state targets, but the industry moves and things change, and it was probably impressive at all that drop targets made it into this game. But regardless, those of you that tune in probably didn't tune in to hear me complain about Williams drop targets for an hour, so I'll move on. I also diagnosed and fixed a short circuit in a game last night. That was an interesting repair, and one that took a little bit of time and some thinking to figure out. What was happening, it was a late 60s Williams, EM, of course, and when it was set to 5-ball, the game would operate normally. Everything would work. It was a 4-player game. Each player would play, score, drain, advance to the next ball, etc. Everything was fine. However, if you set it to 3-ball, the game would hit the game over relay as soon as player number 3 was added. So, in a Williams from the 60s multiplayer, you have something called a coin unit. And the coin unit, as it advances with each additional replay, play, or coin drop, will light the next player. So it basically is keeping track of how many players you have in the game, 1 through 4. Fairly simple. How hard could that be? Right behind it, you have the ball count unit. And this keeps track of which ball you're on. All right, easy enough. And then over to the left, you have the game over relay, which is a trip latch style relay. So there's 2 coils, and each side will pull either when you're starting a game or when the game is over. Fairly simple, straightforward. So looking at the schematic, you have your 3 and 5 ball selector, which is in the back of the head, and it's one of the type that you use a flathead and you turn and set it. It's this metal piece that you turn. It's very interesting looking, actually. But when you have it set on 5 ball, electrically, normally, there's absolutely nothing different between how the game operates in 3 ball and 5 ball, except that the ball count unit can step 2 additional steps. Now, if the ball count unit happens to step to ball number 4, then the game over relay is tripped. Fair enough, right? If it's on 3 ball. Makes sense. If the ball count unit somehow gets to number 4, then the game's done. You know it, because ball number 3 has already been played. Cool. So what I had to do in order to figure out this problem, because it happened repeatedly, every single time that it was tested, when it was set to 3 ball, you push the start button, player 1, great. Start button again, player 2, wonderful. Start button again, game over. Tried a couple times. Same behavior every single time. So that told me there was a short somewhere. And there was a short to the game over relay. Now, why was that? And it only happened on 3 ball. And what I had to do to fix it was to isolate switches. Now, on a stepper, this is something I haven't been over before. In a relay, you can isolate switches by taking a business card or a piece of paper and just putting it between switches. I might have talked about that previously. In a stepper, what you can do is just tuck a business card under one of the legs of the spider and see how the behavior changes. So, knowing that the coin unit would step to the 3rd step and then trip the game over relay, and then I did it by hand to verify, I knew that the problem, the short, was happening on the coin unit. So, what I ended up doing, take a business card and put it under each of the fingers of this spider in turn and see which ones caused it to trip out the game over relay. Well, only one of them did. And here's the interesting thing. It was the player lamp, the player indicator. So the thing that says 1, 2, 3, 4 players can play in the back glass, when it tried to light number 3 specifically, it would trip the game over relay. I said, that's funky. So then what I had to do was determine why there was continuity from lamp number 3's trace on the stepper unit, and these are Williams steppers that have traces instead of rivets, which actually makes them fairly easy to troubleshoot from a short perspective, because you can take your meter, set it to continuity, and then check across various points, which is exactly what I did. So I tested it to game over, and funny enough, there was continuity. I said, there should not be continuity on the coin unit to game over. It does not make any sense. So, then I had to go back and look at the schematic and again look at the difference between 3 and 5 ball. And what I saw was the only difference is in the ball count unit, which happened to be right behind the coin unit. So I said, what are the chances that one of the wipers or one of the traces on the circuit board is shorting to the coin unit. And bingo! That was the problem. So the trace that handled ball number 3 was actually shorted directly to, guess what? Player indicator lamp number 3's trace. So what I ended up having to do, I did have to cut into the harness, and I had to follow the wire. And what I found is that right where the harness made a bend to go into a trunk, it was tied down, it was laced with the factory lacing, nobody had messed with that, but some of the insulation on that wire had come a little ragged, and started to disintegrate right at that little juncture. So what I ended up doing was I took a piece of electrical tape and wrapped it around the slightly ragged bit just to see if that was correct, and sure enough it was. So once that was wrapped with electrical tape, everything was good. Now, the proper fix for that would have been to either take some heat shrink and put it on that piece of the wire. However, I did not have the appropriate length of heat shrink with me. So the other option would have been to replace with a different wire. The wire that I had was very flimsy plastic-coated wire. So I would have had to splice that in, and I realized that that was probably a losing proposition. So I ended up zip tying that into place, which that's not something that I'm fond of. As you might know, I prefer to lace the cables back together. However, the owner was very happy. It worked just fine. So that's always exciting when a discovery like that is made, problem is fixed. And I just wanted to give an example of how you can troubleshoot a short like that, which can be very frustrating. The other piece that I did, and one thing that I like to do, is to isolate whether it's coming from the playfield or from the back box. And in this case, because of the way Williams stacks their units on the bottom board, what I do is unplug the playfield and then remove it. That gives you access to all sides of the coin unit. And the beauty is, if you're testing startup, you can leave the back box hooked up, and as you're pressing start, the motor spins, the coin unit will advance, all that kind of good stuff. So you get to actually test the function without having the playfield in there to interfere, if it's going to interfere. And in this case, it didn't. Great. But beautifully, even though it didn't interfere, it was out of my way. So next time I go over there, I'll give the owner the option of replacing the electrical tape with either a new piece of wire or some heat shrink, and I'll be sure to bring that. But for now, fix works. It'll hold for a little while, so it should be all good. So, moving on, bingos. Let's talk bingos. I have been working on the multi-bingos artwork. However, you may have noticed that there's been a severe lack of updates on that, and that's because I'm just not not very good at art. And the thing that I'm doing is actually very involved for somebody who's not very good at art. So it's one of those things that frustrates me very easily, and I set it down and then start on another project. So right now, that other project is actually a Chicago coin thing. I was able to pick up this game from somebody in Virginia, and I saw the listing, and thought there was no way in heck that this guy would agree to the price that I was offering. He was advertising it for what I thought was a lot of money. The cabinet was completely painted white. The back glass had some fade, some leaching in the reds, but otherwise was completely intact and looked great. The playfield looked wonderful, but that cabinet, that stark white cabinet, really got to me. And the stencil on thing is whimsical and very attractive, and the base coat of the cabinet is red, which is pretty unusual and very eye-catching. The cabinet itself is larger than a standard pinball cabinet or a standard wood rail cabinet. And honestly, I think the game is beautiful. So it really kind of made me sad that this thing had been painted white. All the wood, everything had been painted with the game fully assembled. So, and they even painted over top of part of the back glass. So, you know, hey, I threw out an offer that I thought was ridiculous, and the guy accepted right away. So I guess it wasn't that ridiculous. And went and got it, brought it home, and I have been cleaning paint off this thing ever since. Now, those of you who've been listening for a while know that last year, my daughter Ava learned how to restore games by fixing up a Bally Turf King. And I taught her, you know, how to clean the game, how to maintain the game, how to read schematics, how to solder, all that kind of stuff. Well, when I had that very nice bonding experience with Ava, Sophie let me know in no uncertain terms that the next game was hers, and she wanted the same treatment. So, I haven't picked up a game in quite some time, aside from the multi, which she did help me with the initial wood filler and paint and those kind of things, but she wants to help with the mechanics of the game. So I'm going to consider having her work on the thing with me. The thing that gives me pause with this game is that it is, as I say, larger than a standard pinball. She is only 6 years old, so she's not tall. She's not going to be able to reach a lot of things easily. She's not going to be able to see what she's doing. So what I'm thinking is that I will teach her to read schematics. She can read, so she should be ready for that. And she'll help me with the restoration, but she won't do the majority of the work like I had Ava do. So for the cabinet, because that's very heavy duty, chemically active, gross work, I've been doing that. And Ava helped me on the Turf King. On that one, what I was able to do was to use this product called Mostenbacher's Liftoff on a magic eraser. And Ava and I would take a square, gloves, and face masks on, and scrub, and it would take it away. Now, on that game, the operator had spray painted it, so it was actually a fairly thin coat of paint. On this game, the person who painted it painted using a brush and latex paint, and they really went to town on this thing. I mean, in some spots there are so many layers of paint you would not believe, and I have a feeling that that's because the base coat of this cabinet is red, and just hiding that red is actually fairly involved if you're painting the cabinet white. So my technique of using the magic eraser did not work. The problem was there was too much paint, and once I got down to the actual underlying paint, the problem was that the kind of sandpaper action of the magic eraser would remove the original artwork before I was able to actually stop and see what I was doing. In some spots on the cabinet, the original art is laid on in a extremely thin layer, specifically the head, the sides of the head. There was not a large amount of paint used to do the stencil on the sides of the head, so I have to be very careful when removing paint from the head, especially. Now, unfortunately, there has been some paint loss, and that's unavoidable. At first, I was thinking if I could reveal enough of the stencil to just trace it and then stencil and repaint it, I'd be satisfied. But as I started going on the base cabinet and the front door, I realized, holy cow, this thing actually looks amazing underneath. And if I am cautious and follow this plan that I'm about to give you, it'll work well. So here's what I did. There were certain parts of the paint that were very thin, the white paint now, the latex. And in those places, it had started to flake off. In those instances, what I did was take a fresh razor blade and just kind of push until I could no longer get a cut of the paint off, the white paint. When that happened, I just made sure to go all the way around and cleared out, as much of the flaking part of the paint as I could. And then I was left with kind of the solid paint left and maybe a base of original that I could work out from. So then what I did is I tried a bunch of different chemicals. I tried citrus strip, and that worked relatively well. The biggest problem with that is that it just completely ate through the original paint immediately. So that didn't work. Then I tried Goof Off. I used that in a very small area. Same deal. Just whoop, took all the paint. Now that's the new formula, not the original one. So I went and got a can of xylene, which was the previous active ingredient, after doing a little bit of research. Tried that. Well, that has something in common with citrus strip and the new formula of Goof Off too, because it just took the paint right off. So again, I'm testing in very small areas, in this case under the lock bar, on the front of the cab. So I tried Magic Eraser and alcohol, and that had a similar problem to Magic Eraser and Mossenbacher's Liftoff. When I got down to the original paint, I didn't have enough time to really check what I was doing before the original paint was gone, and I had sanded the cabinet, so I did away with that. Again, the biggest problem there is just the uneven number of layers. So by the time I hit that, and it's a different amount of scrubbing for each little area, so I'm stopping and checking every second or two, and the problem with that is you still mess up. There are a few things more frustrating than that. So, switch back to Mossenbacher's Liftoff, and in this case, the formula that worked was, instead of using Magic Eraser, what I did was took quadruple aught steel wool, so 40. This is the finest steel wool that you can buy. It is the smoothest and least abrasive. There you go. So what I would do is just saturate this thing with Mossenbacher's Liftoff. I'd spray it on one side, not the side that I was holding, but the opposite side that I was going to use to scrub with, probably 24 times. And not enough that it would just drip down the cabinet, but enough that it would have some biting power. And I scrubbed. And I scrubbed, and I scrubbed. I scrubbed some more. Scrubbed some more. And eventually, I got all the paint off the side of the cabinet, the coin door, the front of the cabinet, and both sides of the head. At that point, I stopped and decided to restore the plain wood sections that I could. So this is the lock bar, the side rails, the legs, and the frame that goes around the back glass. Well, the biggest problem here is that removing the paint is going to change the coloration of the wood underneath. Even using something like Mossenbacher's Liftoff and quadruple aught steel wool. The problem is that I'm going to bite into that lacquer coating that is on top of the wood. So, what I ended up doing is sanding. And the problem with sanding wood from 1951 is you don't want to sand it too much. You don't want to get too rough with it, because most of the moisture that originally existed in that wood has long evaporated. And you don't want the legs on these to snap. So you don't want to apply twisting force, and you don't want to really sand them like crazy. At least that's my personal opinion. I'm not a woodworker, but it makes some kind of logical sense. So I've got that in my head anyway. So got them sanded so that I could apply stain, stained them, and then lacquered them. There are small flakes of white which still exist deeply embedded in the grain, and I just did not want to go super crazy sanding this thing until there was no white left. I'd just be concerned with doing that on these legs. But again, I might be nuts. And in that case, someone can follow behind and certainly do that later on if they choose to do so, or replace the legs. But I find value in keeping those original, reusing them if I can. And in this case, I can. They were stainable, lacquered. They look beautiful. I think they look great. However, if you look in just the right sides, just the right areas, you can see the white. But the game's not perfect. I mean, that's the whole thing. There are gouges and things in the cabinet which are still filled with white paint. But there's very few of them, which I find very intriguing. So what I'm curious about is just how damaged the stencil was before it was repainted. It sure looks to me like it was hardly damaged at all. And, you know, someone just decided they wanted it to look different with their decor, which is fine. That's what allowed me to get it for the price that I got it for, so that's all good. I have about a quarter of one side of the cabinet left to clear off of the white paint, and then it should be good to start on cleaning the playfield and working on the mechanics and so forth. So, what else is going on in the EM world? There's a person from Texas who is planning a cross-country trip where he will meet with you in your home and teach you how to read schematics, fix your games, all that kind of good stuff. It's actually an interesting experiment. I'm really interested to see how this goes. I will link to the Pinside thread in the show notes. You can contact him through there. His name is Nicovolta, and he already has quite the itinerary planned, it looks like. So this is very interesting. Of course, education about EMs is one of the things I'm very passionate about. So somebody actually going door to door and teaching this is quite the endeavor. I'm really interested to see how this goes. So, best of luck to Nicovolta. All right, well, that's all for tonight. Thank you very much for joining me. My name again is Nick Baldridge. You can reach me at foramusementonlypodcast@gmail.com, or you can call me on the Bingos line. That's 724-BINGOS1, 724-246-4671. You can listen to us on the iTunes, Stitcher, Pocket Casts, via RSS, on Facebook, on Twitter at Bingo Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram, also at Bingo Podcast, or you can listen to us on our website, which is foramusementonly.libsyn.com. Thank you very much for listening to this very tech-heavy episode of the podcast, and I will talk to you next time.